Do it, Stuart.
Yeah, are you sure you're ready?
I'm definitely ready. Let's do it.
Okay. Ryan, are you ready?
I am ready, sir.
Okay. This is the Storehouse, Filling the Storehouse podcast. I messed that one up. This is Filling the Storehouse
congratulations.
podcast.
This is our first podcast, first episode. We have a very special guest today.
This is my first time ever doing this thing, so I apologize for that. None of this will be cut out because I don't know how to. So, so this is Filling the Storehouse podcast. We have an amazing guest today. His name is Ryan Haley. Welcome, Ryan. How are you, buddy?
Hey, Stu, David, it's great to be on here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, man. It's good to see you. You are not very far away from me, and I know we've Zoom called quite a bit and talked on the phone, but we've actually never physically met, although I know you were in San Diego at the same time I was, and now you're in Colorado at the same time I was, and so there's a fault here that we need to fix pretty soon.
Yeah, I hope we can do that.
Hey, Ryan, just a heads up, you will be underwhelmed.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, Stu. Stu's a specimen of a man, a human being, a Jesus follower, entrepreneur. Kind of short, but I'm jealous you guys are going to get to meet potentially.
Well, I would say Ryan's similar. I don't know about the shortness, but
oh no, that's true as well.
Okay, well there you go, dude. High five. Hey, Ryan, tell our audience a little bit about who you are. I kind of spilled a little bit of it. I know you're a Navy guy from before, but tell our audience a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I was like yourself, naval aviator, flew the SH-60 Bravo helicopter, and I was in a helicopter crash, which is a whole different story we go into or not, but I got commissioned in 2003 from ROTC at the University of San Diego, went to flight school, came back to San Diego in 2006, and I was about to go on my first deployment and was in a helicopter crash. And that was my, literal and figurative come to Jesus moment. So kind of, got my, I'd say that's the time where I was the prodigal son who woke up at the pig slop, kind of being like, what am I doing right now? And so that was the beginning of my kind of re-entry back into my faith journey that, I was born in a Christian home and kind of just went on that prodigal slide, starting in college through flight school and then up to that. So yeah, that's kind of my background: naval officer, pilot, Afghanistan combat veteran. My last assignment was at the Pentagon in DC doing defense analysis, manpower budgeting for the staff of Chief of Naval Operations. And then after that, I kind of went on my entrepreneurial journey, got out of the Navy in 2014, became a realtor for a while. Then I went to work for a startup in Vail area of Colorado, kind of back and forth, a whole bunch of different things. But now I'm doing a podcast as well. I've got a platform called The Better Way, which is kind of how to integrate faith and business, talking about where the supernatural meets the practical, talking about investing, real estate, and recently, I just started doing something new that's actually a great fit for what I've been doing for a while, doing this kind of infinite banking concept as a life insurance agent specializing in helping people get cash value insurance policies and using that as part of a financial strategy to combine with other investments. So yeah, kind of doing all these things together, author, speaker, coach, financial advisor. Sounds like a random assortment of things, but it actually does all come together.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about, so I guess to go back, and I knew this was going to happen with this interview, there's so much there, and you say it's random, but I think it's indicative of who you are, and I think there's a military and Christian background that enables you to balance, I think is huge, and listening to some of your podcasts recently, and then, I've been listening to, I always talk about Rick Warren, but one of the things, just this week, I'm listening to a sermon on balance and the Sabbath and those types of things, and having that, and how you can gain so much more when you actually use God's principles and laws to drive your life. But we can get into that later. But you mentioned A helicopter crash. So yes, I want to hear about that, because it's not only is it super intriguing that you were in a helicopter crash, survived it, but how it put your life on a trajectory. But I also think it's important that I imagine was probably the most significant adversity you'd face at that point, up to that point in your life, and how you rebounded from that. I think a lot of our listeners, military members, whether they, we had on our classmate, last show had lost both legs was he in Iraq or Afghanistan? I'm brain fart now. Stewie.
It was Afghanistan.
And on his first patrol, huge adversity, and then just decided, well, I'm gonna just go, be a Paralympian and win a gold medal. So I think there's a lot of our listeners can really gain from this significant adversity, and then it's not over there, right? And I think you could probably speak to a lot of our listeners by addressing that.
Yeah, no, I would say in a lot of ways that was the beginning point for me. It was the ending point of an old life and the beginning point of a new life. So this was July 2007. I was about to go on my first deployment. We were on a routine training flight. I was doing a practice auto rotation, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, where for anybody who's not familiar, we simulate losing both the engines and having to land without power. It's a dynamic maneuver, but I've done it, hundreds of times by this point. And on this particular one, I was the pilot at the controls, just got off on my parameters, a little slow on the airspeed, and should have waved off and gone around for another pass, but tried to salvage it and didn't work out very well. So we got into a situation where we had a very high descent rate and not much forward airspeed. So we ended up doing a very hard landing, hitting the ground. The right wheel broke off and hydraulic fluid sprayed the side of my right side window. We did a 180, but praise God, we recovered control of the aircraft and eventually landed. Everybody walked away, and that should have been much worse. After the mishap board was done, the ranking safety officer came to me and he was like, Ryan, I have run the models and the simulations from the onboard sensors through the computers all these different times. And every time in the simulation, you guys in the aircraft get into what's called dynamic rollover, where the rotor blades hit the runway and you flip over. And as you guys probably know, not something a naval aviator typically walks away from. So that was kind of miraculous. And I think that was kind of the first sense that I had of, okay, there's something else going on here. So like you said, that was the culminating point of failure. And, I think just a crisis of identity, because I'd put my identity in my work and being a pilot and being an officer and, pretty much crashed and burned that. But like you said, it was actually, not that I believe for one second God caused that, but he can and will use everything in a pattern for good. So for me, it was that wake up call, kind of got me really to the point where I couldn't brush it under the rug anymore. I had to deal with where I was and who I was becoming, and kind of got me back to my senses like the prodigal son. So that was a really important, painful, but important journey. And I think that the takeaway for me is, as I talk about in the book and different, speeches and presentations I do, that what is a setback can actually be a setup if you let it. If you're humble, if you're open-minded, and you're willing to, be honest with yourself, with God, and with other people, I think that can actually work for our benefit. So the way I describe it is kind of being like a divine trampoline, where the lower you go, you can actually get catapulted up higher than you were before. But that's a choice that you have to make. You have to, they say things can either make you bitter or they can make you better. So I made the choice. I was going to let it make me better. And it has been, a generally upward glide slope from that point on. Not that it hasn't had its, kind of ups and downs, but that was, a super formative transition point in my life.
And so I remember that now that you kind of I read the book and kind of recalling back, we were kind of same period of time. I was in San Diego flying as well, and it was down in IB, right? Imperial Beach is when you did it.
It was.
Yeah, so, I remember like hearing about that crash, and we all, they send out like the the safety minutes. And so you can kind of read through that and lessons learned, and your wardroom talks about it and kind of think about things. And, you know, I think it's that piece of, you know, taking those lessons learned and translating it and making yourself better through it. That equates to so many other things in life. You know, it equates to business, and this is a business podcast. And I think, you know, that we can talk on that. We can make a whole episode just on that of, you know, taking those lessons learned, your failures, and making a decision to learn from it and make yourself better for it. So I would be remiss to even say up front, and I should have, let's talk about your book real fast. So your book is called A Better Way. It came out not too long ago. And that's kind of the first story that you talk about that transitions your life and you know, your journey. If you could just kind of give a brief overview of what that book is all about.
Yeah, so I just released it in April, and it's called A Better Way, God's Design for Less Stress, More Rest, and Greater Success. And basically, I'm just using my life story and testimonies, both the good as well as the bad, and showing my journey of going from being very performance-oriented, relying on my own effort and strength, and starting with that kind of, you know, low point with the helicopter crash. And then my journey of really getting this life-changing revelation of God's grace and rest and the practical benefits that has, like you said, in a business context too, as well as spiritually and life in general. But I think all of us who've been in the military know that it's a very, you know, hard driving, performance-oriented culture where self-effort and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is really glorified and has a lot of benefits and results that can come from it. But I think it's a matter of time, whether it's in your career, in your family, your health, whatever it is, at some point, if we're relying on ourselves, we're going to hit that low point and crash and burn, whether literally or figuratively. And what I am trying to share in the book more than anything is this life-changing revelation of God's grace, the freedom it brings, the spiritual connection with God and other people, but also, as I've found, being a very detail-oriented, practical-minded person, it also has incredible applications and outcomes for business and life as well. And that's just probably the thing that's blown me away the most, is how when I let go and let God work for me instead of trying to do his job, how he sets me up for way better things than I could have ever scripted, but it's always in a way that I never would have imagined or, you know, kind of come up with on my own. So that's kind of the basic idea of the book. And then I bring in, you know, business, investing, real estate, those kinds of different things. And, you know, as you were talking, Stu, I was thinking right before you said it, that those failures in investing can be really helpful and kind of be that springboard for success if you let it. And around that same time, I bought a condo in 2006, you know, right before the market crashed, and didn't understand anything. And like you said, Stu, I used that failure. I mean, I basically sold after 6 years where I had negative $1,200 a month cash flow on that property, then end up selling at a 50% loss in 2012. And thank God for the military housing assistance program. Yeah, you guys too. You're pointing to yourselves.
HAP, right?
HAP. Oh,
Yeah,
HAP. Thank God for HAP.
So HAP didn't save me because we bought too much of it was over the cap. Like it was too expensive of a house. So really bad failure on my part.
Yeah, well, it looks like you've recovered very nicely, Stu, from what you guys are doing now. And, you know, so thank God for me. A lot of people didn't make it through that. Some people went bankrupt or worse. And I basically walked away free and clear, but it was kind of a bitter pill to pay $2,400 a month in payments for 6 years and have nothing to show for it. But again, very grateful for that program. But using that experience in business and in real estate, I was able to do the exact opposite pretty much on every single level. And then had a very successful property sale, hold, and acquisition over the last several years, which we can talk about if you want. But that was also really formative too. I think sometimes, and I'm sure everybody says this, you know, you can learn as much or more from your failures as well as your successes. So that's what I'm sharing in the book on a variety of levels. And I've seen just so many amazing things in my life over since that helicopter crash, but even more so in the last 3 to 5 years. So yeah, it's just kind of using my story, my testimony to bring to life these spiritual principles and the word, and really inspire and encourage people, as well as show some of those practical benefits and kind of talk about the business and investing side of things, as well as the spiritual side.
Yeah, you said a few things there, and I think it's summed up in that last thing you said with learn from your failures. And as you were talking earlier, and I find it shocking that you didn't intentionally plan a helicopter crash to project you onto the current life. That's shocking. I think you're such a good planner that you do that.
Exactly.
But one thing that keeps popping in my head is Jeremiah 29:11. And earlier when you talked about, you do not attribute the crash to God's plan, but everything that he does, he has plans for you for success, right? He has plans for you that are not for disaster, but they're for good. And that verse kept popping in my head as you're talking, because God absolutely can take any situation and turn it around. But I think one thing that you really hit on, and I'm curious on why you did this, and if it drives towards your bigger why, and you can tell us about that if you'd like. But it's not about learning from your failures. It's about learning from your failures and then taking actions to do something about it, right? Yes. And so I had a house in Hawaii. I bought it at $400 a square foot. I bought it in 2006. I was so ignorant. I'm a lieutenant in the Navy at this time. I didn't even know what the VA loan was. I'm embarrassed to admit it now, but I use it as a lesson to all these academy dudes that we talked to and folks that we talked to. I'm like, I didn't even know what the VA loan was. I probably could have salvaged the deal if I knew what the VA loan was, right? Mm-hmm. So I made every mistake you could possibly make and was losing $1,200 a month when it was rented. It was fully rented. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up giving over to HAP to take care of that after years of losing money. But I think what you hit on is you do learn from your mistakes, but you have to take actions. And that's a pretty big, significant thing, to lose your identity, to be in a helicopter crash, and then just completely turn around from that. I know you attribute a lot of that to God, but what's your why? Like, what drives that inner just keep going that you have?
Yeah. First, I wanted to address something you just said, which was, it's not just about learning from your mistakes. It's about taking action based on what you learned. And I thought of something one of my mentors says, that to know and not to do is not to know. So you haven't really learned if you haven't done something differently, is what I would say, kind of just saying the same thing differently. And that's what I think I've done in a lot of ways. And that leads me to my why, because I didn't really have a plan or a vision for my life for a long time. And then after that crash and getting closer to God and kind of digging deeper into who I am, who God is, who we are in relation to each other, a pretty formative moment for me was in Afghanistan in about 2010, 2011, when I was reading the StrengthsFinder book, and it talked about how you don't have to spend all this time struggling against the grain of who you are to try to shore up your weaknesses. You should spend the majority of your time investing in cultivating and living out your strengths. And that was just a life-changing philosophy or paradigm shift for me. And it really kind of birthed something on the inside of me, which I wouldn't know the significance of till many years later. But I think for me, one of my biggest whys is to turn my life into something that is aligned with the way God created and designed me. So talking about, what are your deepest passions? What are your greatest strengths? What's the greatest way that you can add service or value to other people? And then another part that I just recently had another layer to this whole thing is your deepest pain. And so I think my passion and my pain work really strongly together, because I had been so unfulfilled and discontent with my work life for a really long time, not really knowing, what I was put on this earth to do, and just kind of going on this track. I was in the Navy. God had, definitely a plan for that. But when I started to figure out, wait a minute, I can actually do what I love doing, what I'm naturally good at, and be paid well to do it by adding more value to people's lives. Like that was a life changer for me. So I think that became a huge part of my why over the last 10 years is, God, just like bring me into those things that are going to be fulfilling, life-giving, and the also going to have the greatest level of success. And then now that I've kind of stepped into that, and it's an ongoing process, but I think having gone through that journey for, the better part of a decade, a huge part of my why now is helping other people to find out who God made them to be, how they can leverage what I call their sweet spot, which is the intersection of those things, your deepest passion, deepest pain, greatest strength, and greatest service. And so that's been, because I had such a profound time of discontent and unfulfillment in that, and now I've stepped into this amazing freedom and fulfillment. It's my life mission, my why, to manifest the goodness of God to other people. And a big part of that is helping them discover what makes them come alive and what God's purpose is and good plans, like you talked about in Jeremiah 29, are for them. And that's a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing with The Better Way and the coaching and kind of the inspirational communication side. And recently, it's also connected to why I'm doing this stuff with investing, with infinite banking, and entrepreneurship, because a lot of people, they may have identified the vision for their life and the purpose that God put them on this earth, but they don't know how to get there. So there's like this, big picture vision and heart kind of stuff. And then there's a very practical, detail-oriented side of it. And so why I'm doing what I'm doing with investing, with business and entrepreneurship and infinite banking is because it's worked for me. It's got me to a point of passive income and freedom so I can pursue my God-given passions and dreams. And I want to be able to help other people benefit from that in the same way. So doing what you guys are doing, helping people with that, all these different things are coming together. That's ultimately for the purpose, the big why of experiencing fullness of life, both here as well as in eternity.
I think, this podcast and our business in general is a combination of just that, putting the Christian faith-based background to business. And I know you were on Ellis Hammond's podcast about kingdom capitalists, and that's what this is all about, right? Is using business. This is our ministry, really.
Amen. Yeah.
And Dave and I have seen there's been so many times where people have reached out to us, and they've claimed their faith again, just because they hear us talking about it all the time in our podcasts, and telling about our vision and our mission and our why. It's been really, really cool to see. And I mean, there's been so many times where we've been like in a pinch or a pickle with our business, and like we've needed something, and like just like that, God steps forward and hands something over to us, and it might be in a little bit of a different way, like you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it's been really, really cool to see. I'm curious, and you talk about it in the book a little bit, but just, for this podcast, what is a better way? Like what is this better way that you talk about? And, I know there's a lot of just allowing God to take over, but how does that practically look? Like, I mean, how do we do that?
So the definition I use for a better way is basically depending on God and his abilities, strength, and wisdom, much more than my own human efforts, abilities, and wisdom, and letting him do for me what I could never do for myself. And the way I kind of define that is in that subtitle, which is God has a design for us that is not only less stress and more rest, but also it's going to lead to even greater success, which is just crazy to me. It's one thing to say, because I used to kind of think like, okay, I can either have peace or excellence in results. But if I go more on the peace side, I'm going to lose the excellence, the drive, and the positive results, or I can focus on excellence and results, but it's going to be stressful. And not only is it not that, it is literally the opposite, that the less that I stress out, the less that I try to work hard and toil in my own human effort, the more that God can do even better than I could have ever done. So that's kind of the basic idea, is that we're not limiting ourselves to our our human efforts and abilities, as considerable as those are, because we're made in his image. But it's seeing like, okay, God, this is the way I thought this would have gone, but clearly you had a much different path. And sometimes that's not his original plan, but he'll work those things around and kind of redirect us. But usually, even if it is his plan, it's so different than what I would have come up with, but it's always so much better. So one of the things I like to say is, we can have it our way or we can have it a better way. And I've done both. God's way is better. Take it from me.
Yeah, that's such a great message. And I think even, one of the things that's interesting is, and like our podcast, for example, or something I think about quite often is not everybody shares our faith, right? A lot of the people that we do business with don't share our faith. And how do you also emphasize, and I think they're just Christians in waiting, most of them, but how do you emphasize that these principles are still practical and they're still very, very beneficial, and God can work through all of them, right? And I think what's really interesting is when you think about it, and there's data to show this, but just think of your own, for our listener out there, just think of when you're most productive. And like for me, last weekend I was out. My wife was gracious enough to give me the weekend to go with one of my closest friends in the world, go fly fishing. Actually went to USD, Mike Chaney. That name ring a bell to you?
Oh, nice. That does sound familiar, actually. I don't know why, but
we spent a lot of time, Stewie, up in USD during midshipman times. But, and I was out on the river, and the way I fly fish, I kind of go off on my own. I'm fishing, I'm catching fish and just spending time in God, just thinking about Jesus, thinking about his creation, thinking about my friends, thinking about the business. And then ideas just come, right?
Yeah.
And you're relaxed and you're in God's presence, and you're just like, that is for me, the ideal place is a river fly fishing. Like that is God created me to be out there and do that, right, and give me ideas there. Right.
Yeah.
But just the idea of taking a break.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, you don't have to tie the Sabbath to it. We do, but you're still blessed in those times. Taking the time to be very intentional in those moments. I think everybody can benefit from that. And it's super important. So I think the principles of your book, whether you're a believer or a non-believer or a Christian in waiting, your book highlights those key things, those messages that you can absolutely grow from. And there are rich times and there's blessings in that. And I think it's rad. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And I think it's so practical.
Absolutely.
What David doesn't mention is he gets so many ideas flowing because he never catches any fish. He just throws over and over again. So he has so much time to think because he's never catching fish. So,
as a Christian man, I will not highlight our trip to Montana for my 40th birthday that Stu was there. I'll just let the memories be what they are for him. But I think the fish
memories.
The fish count was, I basically offered at one point, I'm like, Stu, I'll catch a fish. I'll hand you my fly rod. You can reel it in and land it. And then you can say you caught a fish today.
Not true.
That's funny. Well, hopefully he's a better fisher of men than he is a fisher of fish.
Ooh, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah, no, you're so right, Dave. Like, and I can give you a couple of practical examples in my life of what that looked like. When I was a realtor, and that was totally, I'd never had that thought in my mind, but I really do believe the Lord led me into that. But it got to a point where after working really hard for about 18 months and seeing some insane miracles that I talk about in the book and the podcast a lot, right as my pipeline starts filling up and I'm starting to finally get that kind of traction and momentum, I started to lose my peace and I couldn't figure out why. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, what is wrong with me? I just need to get it together, get my head back in the game, put my hand to the plow. And so I took 4 days off out of, completely off the grid, no technology, personal silence, literally at a monastery in the outskirts of Virginia. And in that time, I felt like the Lord was saying, it's okay for you to feel this way and to maybe be going a different direction. In fact, not only is it okay, this is actually my spirit in you leading you into a transition to a next season. And if you were to fight against that, you'd actually be fighting against me. Because I came into it thinking like, okay, I'm sorry, God, let me just help, get my, come back to true north. He's like, no, this is me. This isn't you. I've got something for you. And so in that time of taking time aside, whether you call it a Sabbath or just, a break from the grind or whatever, I had so much more clarity and peace. Like you said, Dave, it's amazing. I've actually done some presentations where not even from a spiritual perspective, from like a secular neuroscience perspective, it proves that the brain is more creative and has a better problem solving capacity when it's at rest and when you're stressed out. And that's where creative ideas and inspiration come in business and life and all these different things. And so that's when I kind of got that. And I just sat around kind of indefinitely. And the Lord just told me, when you come back from this, like, you're going to stop actively working in real estate, refer all the leads in your pipeline out, and just wait on me for whatever's next. And that sounded like foolishness to me. I was like, get behind me, Satan. That is crazy. And then basically 3 out of the 4 days I was out there, it was just the Lord convincing me that it was actually him speaking that to me and not my flesh or the enemy or whatever. And so then again, because I took that time aside, all these amazing opportunities started to open up that I couldn't have scripted, and don't have time to go into it now, but it ultimately led me on the path to where I am. And then as you keep going deeper in that, I think there's always going to be a point where you are fundamentally conflicted with the way you've thought and done things before with God's different way. And so for instance, coming back to, real estate, investing in business, when I learned from that condo in San Diego and I had some savings accumulated, I came to Charis Bible College in 2016. I was looking to invest my money and probably just buy real estate. And I assumed I'd just buy a home, use a VA loan up here in Woodland Park. And, it's a good market and all that. And then I felt like the Lord told me at one point in my first year of Bible college, like, hey, you could do that and I could bless that, but why don't you just challenge me for my best? What if you didn't have to have a mortgage or any kind of debt to buy a property? What if I could give you a property, or I could help you find one you could pay all cash for? And as we all know from having financial backgrounds and, understanding capital allocation and leverage and all that kind of stuff, that makes absolutely no sense. That is a completely inefficient capital allocation model, especially for someone like me who doesn't have a huge net worth, And so I'm like, okay, that's crazy. But I was just enough open to it because I'd had those experiences in the past where God's way was totally different and way better than mine. And long story short, like I said, I do the exact opposite of everything I had done back in 2006. Ended up connecting with someone who brought me out to a market in Columbus, Ohio, in the Midwest that I would have never considered. I just assumed I'd, buy where I was going to live. And he's like, no, I don't actually like this market. Here's why. He took a totally different approach. And so I ended up going out on a trip with him to look at these properties, kind of doing something very similar to, I think, what you guys are doing. And long story short, 2 weeks later, I own a fourplex that's generating $2,800 a month that I was able to buy on an all cash basis, partly using this infinite banking concept. It had $2,800 a month and it was $125,000 for the property.
Wow. That's
which
legit.
is insane. I mean, to get $2,800 a month out here in Woodland Park, I'd have to spend at least $400,000, if not more. But, and then I wasn't planning on selling it. Oh yeah, exactly. And so I've got most of my net worth tied up in this one property, which doesn't sound very smart, but, after 2.5 years, wasn't planning on selling it, but found an amazing opportunity. I sold it for $175,000 just in February of this year. So got about 40% appreciation in 28 months, which is not bad. Had, average cash flow of about $850 a month. And so my net total return after 28 months was 44% with an IRR of 18% and an NPV of over $55,000. So not what I would have thought to do, but because I followed God's way, not only did I get an amazing return, amazing passive income, but I think maybe most importantly, I understood from personal, practical experience what I had a lot of head knowledge about. And that served me incredibly well and opened up all kinds of doors and opportunities that I'm stepping into now because I was willing to just be, just barely open to this crazy idea the Holy Spirit gave me. And so whether it's taking time apart from your job where you feel like you need to be on your grind 24/7 and having amazing opportunities open up when, you're taking time away from work, or, buying an all cash property and doing things in a totally different way that makes no sense. That's inevitably, I think, what the Lord's going to bring us into. But again, I think that some people tend to be on one end of the spectrum or the other. They're so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good, or they're so focused on their flesh. It's the old saying. I didn't come up with that, and I see a lot of that. I see a lot of that, in the body of Christ. People aren't willing to put their hand to something and actually have that practical orientation. But on the other side, people are just doing everything in their own human strength and kind of putting lip service to faith and prayer, just slapping, to God be the glory at the end of it. But there's no glory if you do something that you could do in your own ability. God's not in that. And so when it's impossible for you, but God makes it happen anyway, I think that's what brings him glory. So I've found this, it's not without results. And that's a verse that I really like, is that the Apostle Paul talks about, by God's grace, I was able to labor more abundantly than everybody else, but not me, the grace of God working in me to accomplish these things on my behalf. And so I think that if you're really following the Lord's plan, there's going to be fruit, there's going to be results and success at some point, not necessarily in the linear way we think about it in human terms, but eventually you're going to see some kind of, results or fruit that speaks to the kind of tree that you've cultivated. And that's what I found over and over working with people like you, many others, is that there will be, success leaves clues or indicators, right? And when we're doing it God's way, that's even more true.
It's awesome, man. But that's hard to do, right? I mean, even if you are a Christian, even if you are, a follower of Jesus Christ and understand those concepts, like human nature kind of falls in place sometimes. And, there's so many talks and books and things of just, promoting the hustle and the grind and, early bird gets the worm and, crush it all day long. And, like, how do you balance that? I mean, I get up at 4 a.m. every single morning with the intention of just getting after it, because that's when I'm at my best in the mornings. And, I'm trying to do, our real estate job. And then I got my Navy job, and then I got my family. And it's nonstop. Like I had phone call after phone call after phone call after podcast after emails, and it's just nonstop. So how do you put that in place? Like, how do you intentionally, put yourself at rest and rely on God to fill in those gaps?
I wanted to add to that. How do you put your pride into place? Like, I don't know, someone, maybe his name rhymes with Pooert Baser, who's like, I'm just on all these podcasts. Like, there's such a demand for my time. Like, so many people want to hear from me. I'm just wondering how you like kind of balance all that out.
You cut out, like you like cut out right when you were saying.
No.
Do I need to repeat the question?
No.
No, those are great questions. And it's a fight every single day. I've written a book on it. I've lived it out, but every single day I still have to be intentional, because especially when you find something that you really love doing and that you can get really focused into. Like, I love what I'm doing right now as a financial advisor, infinite banking practitioner, and everything I'm doing with the Better Way. And there are times where I have to consciously pull myself out of that and be like, no, I'm not just going to get up and dive right into checking my email and getting things done. I am going to set that time aside as sacred and have an intentional discipline, if you were. Well, it's a 4-letter word to me sometimes, but there is a discipline to rest. And so I will constantly trying to recage my gyro, back to true north. And it's so easy to let that insidious kind of slip happen over time. So it is a conscious thing, but when you're doing it, I think what I've noticed is that it's a real sacrifice, like I know I need to get these things done. The Lord knows what needs to get accomplished. He knows what my needs and desires are, as far as myself and how to serve other people. But if I will prioritize time with him and receiving from him truly, not just, writing down a list of things and, kind of just getting through my 5-minute devotional real quick. And then, just asking God to bless the efforts that I'm already engaging in. It's like, okay, God, really, what do you want me to do? And sometimes you have to really pull yourself out of that. But when you do, and the Lord gives you something that's from him, it will bear disproportionate fruit or ROI than anything you would have done. So I might have an email or a to-do list of like 25 items in a day. And then God's like, no, why don't you just spend time with me? And then he'll give me one idea or one person to reach out to. And that just opens up a whole world that accomplishes much more quickly than I could have done on my own. And so it's an intentional thing. And at the same time, I'll say, when you do step into your sweet spot, when you are living under God's grace, you'll be stepping into something that, again, you're naturally talented in, you love it, you're passionate and gifted in it. And you'll get much more accomplished, just like Paul talked about. Like, he was so driven by zeal for God. And then when he got a revelation of grace, like, it was just naturally propelled him. So, I'll stay up sometimes till 3 or 4 in the morning, crunching spreadsheets and running financial models because I just love it. And then I wake up at 7 or 8 and I just jump out of bed and I can keep doing it. So when God's grace is on it, you're going to be much more productive. You're going to be, quote unquote, working harder than you ever have, but it doesn't feel like work because you love it. It's in your natural inclination. It's aligned with who you are. And you get so much more leverage out of those activities in the ways that God leads you to do them than you would by doing it yourself. So again, it's not without results. Like, the results will speak for themselves. A tree is known by its fruit. But when I'm, running numbers for a property or a policy illustration for a client, it's like, I love what I do. It doesn't feel like work. So I can engage in it way more than I would, much more efficiently. But it doesn't drain me. It's actually life-giving instead of life-sucking.
Yeah. And your reference to Paul made me think about, his influence and God using different opportunities and how that works out. Right. And you look at like most of his writings, his letters, where did they take place? Well, it took place in a dark, dungy dungeon tied to a guard 24 hours a day.
A dungy dungeon? Is that
a dungy dungeon. Yes. Where, and how did God use that? And that's something that always just strikes me. And it was almost like it was required because his zeal was so intense that God's like, okay, you're going to relax in a jail. This probably could have been a more comfortable place. And so he was constantly tied to a guard who he's ministering to day and night, I'm sure.
Right. Exactly.
And how many of them. And then he's writing these letters that are most influential letters in the Bible without debate. And I think it's really interesting that, just that perspective as you're talking through that stuff, like how we can be used in any situation and how those things, how those opportunities, there's an opportunity in everything and you don't know what that looks like. You don't know when that's going to come and to be constantly ready to take that opportunity and turn it, take your actions and those opportunities, and where they meet, you find success and you don't even know what that success necessarily looks like. And I just think that's a beautiful principle. And I love how you highlighted that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as you balance all this stuff, what are your goals? Like, what are you looking forward to? What is Ryan looking forward to the next, year, 5 years, 10 years?
I think, one of the biggest goals that I have is to have enough capital, influence, and knowledge or value to add that I have a disproportionate impact in business as well as in ministry and culture. And so one of the goals I've had for a long time is to be able to generate, $5,000 a month of net passive income. And I haven't gotten there yet. I also sold recently, like I wasn't planning on it, but I think it's having the financial freedom, and then beyond just freedom, like that, exponential excess so that you can give and have influence and be able to really make an impact in secular culture as well as Christian culture. And like you said, Dave, there's so many times where there's an opportunity that is wrapped up in the packaging looks like a crisis or something bad, and maybe it is, but there's sometimes gifts that are inside that. And that's what I've seen over and over. Again, the helicopter crash, that wasn't from the Lord. I know that, but it helped me. Then even coronavirus, like I was ready to release my book in February. It got pushed a little bit. And I'm thinking, now I finally released it in, late April, which is like right in the middle of lockdown and all this stuff happening. And I realized, that was a God setup too, because now people, number one, they're hungry because everybody's fearful, everybody's uncertain. I think that's the times when a lot of people become a lot more open in their hearts and their minds. And then practically they're stuck at home anyways. People are reading books, they're going through all kinds of material. So what better time for a book about the encouragement of God's grace and the practicality of entering into his rest? And they can actually, number one, read the book and have the bandwidth to go through it and interact with the material, but then they can actually start applying it, because whether or not they want to, most people were stuck at home in kind of a forced place of rest. So I saw even in that how God, use those things in the midst of a pandemic, a crisis. And we see this over and over again in the Bible. And then also we know as investors, the best possible opportunities open up in the middle of the worst possible economic situations. The vast majority of fortunes have been made in a severe downturn. And if you can be patient and wait and not rush it and just be, that smart money that comes in, as I think it was Baron von Rothschild said, the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets. So if you can wait and be patient, you can capitalize on amazing opportunities in the midst of difficulties. And I think also you can be a blessing to other people who are really struggling. They need those people to come in and pay cash and get them out of a bad situation. So, the Lord, again, he'll always work those things together. It's got Jeremiah 29:11, but I also think of Romans 8:28, which is, it says that, the Lord works everything into a pattern of good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so whether or not it was something he initiated, or if it's something totally opposite of from him, he still can and will turn that around and make it work. So I think that's been true in a variety of different contexts in my life.
Yeah, one thing you said that before you jump in, Stu, that I love. So I have this thing, I call it focus, and it's on my calendar as a repeat every day. It's some key verses that I read through every day, but the very top one's not a verse. It says, Lord, let me make a difference for you that is utterly disproportionate to who I am. I like
Amen.
to read that every morning. And when you said that disproportionate impact, man, because it's so true. Like it can be, you kind of step aside. Rick Warren always says, hey, the scariest prayer that you can say is use me. Yeah. Right. And I think that it's so true, because you don't know what that looks like, but if you're open, your heart is open to being that conduit through which good blessings go to others. And you're not, I'm going to use that saying that you said, you're too heavenly to be any earthly good. I love that, man. And I think that there's some practical things. And if more Christians would have that mindset and be like, one of the things that Stu kind of taught me, and we got it via some other source, but I've implemented it every day now, is asking the question, how can I serve you? Mm-hmm. And having that picture of Jesus washing the disciples' feet and doing these things that are so countercultural, mm-hmm. but there's such huge blessings and there's power in it. I think it's just an amazing perspective. So thank you for sharing that and writing an entire book on things like that. So.
Hey, thanks for writing your book, dude. Appreciate that.
Yeah, dude, thanks for writing a book, man.
Dude, this has been fun, man. I can we just talk for like another hour or so? Can we just cancel all of our other appointments and just keep on going?
See, this is a perfect example right here of, we're working, quote unquote, but it doesn't feel like work. I was just doing a podcast interview last night, it's like 6 p.m. my time, 8 p.m. his. And we're like, this doesn't feel like work. I just love this. This is just what we do. We get to connect. And just real quick, Dave, just piggyback on something you said. When you do ask God to use you, he will. And it sometimes is a very scary prayer. But what I've found to be really true for me and a lot of other people is that God will absolutely use me, but in many ways, he's going to use me despite myself, not because of myself. And we saw how he used the Apostle Paul, who we keep bringing up, despite the fact that he was probably the most intense persecutor of the church and did all these terrible things. He had a zeal for God just without knowledge. And then God's like, okay, I can work with this. I'm going to use it. Yeah, you're murdering Christians. You're going completely against everything that I'm trying to accomplish, but we're going to use that. And then we see what happens when he got a revelation of grace, got knocked off his donkey, and, had this complete life conversion. he became one of the most influential apostles or, disciples that's ever lived. And so God used those good tendencies he put in him that had been misdirected, and then was able to turn it around into alignment with his purposes. So I found that for myself. My tendency is perfectionism, performance, anxiety, all these things. And yet, what am I writing a book about and talking about? Grace, rest, peace, all these things. Yet God's also using my natural inclinations of being very driven, very practical minded, and trying to get things done, but in a way that's submitted to him and his spirit.
Dude,
that's rad.
How do people get your book?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is abetterwaypodcast.com. You can also get it on Amazon, and there's a Kindle version, there's a paperback, and actually I just finally got the hardback version recently too. So you can get all those on Amazon or on my website. And I definitely would love to hear from people who have gotten positively impacted. I can't tell you, coming back to the why, how encouraging it is for me to hear people saying how much the book or the podcast or whatever it is has influenced them and encouraged them. And I've started to get some more coaching clients and people on my email list that are coming through and just telling me, these different things. And I mean, that makes it so worthwhile for me. That's my, psychic paycheck, as my mentor calls it. And it's a really, really just powerful reminder and sense of fulfillment that this is what it's all about. The reason of writing the book was to touch hearts and minds. The reason for building wealth is not just to, build bigger storehouses and accumulate more riches that are just going to pass to somebody else when we die. It's for ultimately, again, for me, that big why, that purpose of becoming someone who can manifest God's goodness and catalyze it in other people who then continue that process.
Yeah, man, let me just encourage you. You are a man of influence. You're putting out a good word. Their lives are being changed. And for all the people that are letting you know the impact that you've made, I bet you there's multiples of 10 that you'll never know until you get to heaven. Right. And so, I would just continue to encourage you to keep crushing it, keeping that faith and keeping the perspective and continuing to go back to the well and man, I love it. And you mentioned earlier, the tree. I oftentimes envision a tree next to a river with just deep roots and fruit, right? And that fruit is a picture that I'm constantly trying to cultivate in my life, because a lot of my fruit is either not present or it's rotten. And to really refine that, dudes like you are really inspiring folks to really tap into that. So thank you for that. And I think it's also worthwhile to note, and I missed it if you have it, but do you have an Audible version? Because Stu, reading and words, those things are very, very challenging. And I feel for them, right? You have to be gracious and show love. But if there's an Audible version, that'd be awesome too.
I don't. And I've had a lot of people ask me about that. I am working on that eventually. That's not exactly, a hard scheduled date, but that is something I'm looking to do, because I know more people are getting it that way. So
for all the Stews out there.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's not a set date, but eventually I do plan to have that done. But I will say, my friend told me this the other day, is that I guess the way that we have it formatted in Kindle, that you can actually, it'll read out loud to you at certain settings or in a certain, I don't know what the thing is, but I guess that's a possibility. He said that he did set it up so that it could read. So Stu, if that's going to help you out, then
I already read it. I already read it. Okay. I read it. I did read it on Kindle. I didn't have someone read it to me. And yes, I can read. So David.
My bad. I promised I wouldn't share our secrets on these shows, and I just always fail. I apologize, dude.
Well, guys, go get Ryan's book. It's really good. Ryan, it made an impact on me, man. It was awesome, and I really appreciate it. I hope this episode had some impact on you. It's a different way of thinking, but it's the right way of thinking. Go read it, go share it, share this episode, like it, give me some amazing 5-star reviews. You can say something bad about David. Say lots of good things about Ryan too. Most important, what is it, David?
I'm not gonna take your line, dude.
Oh, it's go fill your storehouse.
Make it a great day.
See ya.